Oh, so welcome, Kate. Good to see you on Facebook. So, first of all, I would like to thank Jack and Barbara Jepson for dedicating this class in honor, this course, I'm sorry, in honor and the memory of Jack's father. Um, Thank you for bringing Torah and Talmud to the Chabad in Shelton. And I'd like to thank Sandy, Mark and Fran, Joe and Louise, and all those who dedicated classes and also enabled us to bring Torah free of charge to the wider community. So thank you very, very much. And with that, I would like to welcome everyone to the final lesson of this course, The Dilemma. I hope that all of you had a very enjoyable journey studying the topics of this course. And more importantly, I hope that you found the process of the Talmudic learning to be exhilarating and interesting. So today for the final lesson, we're going to deal with the following question. What happens when someone damages property or causes harm to another human being, but the perpetrator argues, whether in court or to the police, whatever it may be, he argues that his act isn't something that he deserves to be punished for. Why? Because all he did was preempt a harm that would have happened either way. And I'm going to explain to you and give you a few cases where that happened. So should this person still be punished and be held liable for his act, even though the act was only preempting something that would have happened either way? So let's begin with our great case studies, always my favorite. Here. I'm going to share with you my screen where you can see some interesting videos. I'm on the wrong page, my bad. Here we go. All right, let me share my screen here. So this is case study A.
A 14-year-old New Hampshire boy by the last name of Dylan often scaled the girders of a public bridge with his friends. One afternoon, Dylan lost his balance and grabbed hold of electric wires to save himself from plunging to his death. The wires, owned and maintained by Twin State Gas and Electric Company, carried a high-voltage current. Dylan was electrocuted and died instantly. Dylan's father sued the electric company for its negligence in not insulating their wires. The company conceded that the wires were not insulated properly, but argued that the boy was falling to his death regardless. Had their wires not been there, he would have died on the roadway or in the river below. Should Twin State Gas and Electric Company be held liable for death by negligence? What do you say?
So what do you say? Sandy, any comments? Anyone watching on Facebook that has any comments as to this company? Should Twin State be liable for Dylan's death? They claim, what's the big deal, right? The boy would have died either way. Whether it was from the wire, whether it was from the river, the highway, this boy would have been killed 1,000%. It was just a matter of how. So should that exempt them from paying any damages to the family of Dylan? Tough call. Any thoughts, Andy?
Well, my only thought is that, he shouldn't have been there. He had no right. So
Right.
in that event, I should think, and I'm not sure, because every time I think something, it's usually the opposite, but I think that they should not be liable, only because he, like you insinuated that he was going to die anyway.
Right. So, Kate, just to understand when you say hard to say yes, you mean that it's hard to say that they should be liable or that they shouldn't be liable? Not exactly sure. Maybe you can write them in the comments. But it's very not simple because they're just saying, obviously, it's sad. Of course it's sad. But this kid was dying either way. The fact that he held on and got electrocuted, that doesn't change anything. Okay, let's move on to case study B, which is also a sad case. But at least over here, the difference is that it's not about life and death. It's actually about damage to property. So here we go with case study B.
Reuben owned a store in Israel. Early one morning, he caught two burglars red-handed, busily loading his merchandise into a vehicle. To prevent them from fleeing with his goods, he shattered the car's windshield and contorted its steering wheel. The thieves abandoned the car and the merchandise and fled by foot. The police subsequently discovered that the vehicle had been stolen. The vehicle's rightful owner then sued Reuben in the Jerusalem Rabbinical Court for damaging his car. Reuben responded that the car's owner's loss was not his fault because the car was in the process of being stolen from its owner. Should Reuben be liable for damaging a car that would have been lost to its owner? What do you say?
So again, over here, thankfully, we're not dealing with some life and death situation, which is a lot more emotional, a lot harder to judge favorably. But this case study actually reminds me of a few previous lessons that we went through, different questions. We asked whether one is allowed to take law into his own hands. We asked whether, if you end up causing a greater good, can that exempt you from being liable? All those questions are beyond the scope of today's lesson. But if you go back to previous lessons, you'll hear that we discussed them in previous lessons. So now the question is, what Reuben is basically telling the car owner, he's saying, obviously, he's not asking whether he's allowed to do such a thing. That's, not even the question. The question here is something very different. Reuben is saying that he owes nothing to the car owner because he really only damaged a car that was about to be lost from its owner, right? Meaning, imagine the car was worth $1,000, okay? It was an older car. And now let's imagine that the repairs were also worth $1,000. So he's basically telling the car owner, and this is his line of reasoning, he's saying, if I didn't do anything, you would have lost $1,000 because you'd have lost your car regardless. And now that I did act and I damaged $1,000 worth, you're also losing $1,000. So really, I didn't cause you any harm. So based on that, should Reuben be liable to pay for any damages he caused to the vehicle if seemingly the line of reasoning can make sense, saying, I didn't really cause any damage? Obviously, physical damage was done, but monetary loss, you would have lost that damage either way. You would have lost your car, right? So it gets very sticky there as well. Now, of course, and Sandy, I'm not sure if you're thinking this or not, but of course, it goes without saying that it's a very valid point if, and we'll discuss this later on, whether the owner had theft insurance, etc. We're going to discuss this later on in the lesson. But let's move on to case study 3. Okay. Case study 3, here we go.
Reuben owned the ground floor of a house, which he used for storage. Simeon owned the upper 2 floors. When the upper floor wall required repair, Simeon chose to repair it himself. His demolition quickly ran awry when a large portion of the wall collapsed inward, causing the 2nd floor ceiling to collapse under its impact. The combined debris caused the 1st floor ceiling to collapse as well, which destroyed Reuben's 3 barrels of wine that had been stored there. Reuben sued Simeon for negligence for failing to hire a professional contractor, and demanded reimbursement for the wine and for the repair of his ceiling. Simeon argued that a professional assessment would prove that Reuben's rickety ceiling had been teetering on the point of collapse even before his construction mishap. If Reuben's claim is substantiated, should he then be freed from liability for having caused the collapse of an already doomed ceiling? What do you say?
So again, we have, oh, hey, Mark.
Yeah, sorry, I'm a little late.
No problem. So again, we have a very specific type of case. This is a case that happened many, many years ago. Now, just that you understand what the case is, we had 3 floors of a house. We had Reuben on the bottom floor, Simeon on the top 2 floors, and Simeon was doing construction work on the top floor and ended up caving in. Ended up caving in all the way down till the 1st floor. So Simeon says, what do you mean? I don't owe you any money. Yes, I damaged some wine, but I don't owe you anything because your ceiling was so bad, it was going to break either way. And I can prove it. I can hire professionals, and I'll tell you that your ceiling was about to cave in either way. If he manages to bring in professionals and they show that his his ceiling was about to cave in, the question is, should he be exempt from any damages that he caused to Reuben's 1st floor apartment?
So
Any thoughts there, Mark?
let me understand what I kind of came in the middle of that thing. So the guy had the roof repaired.
So there's 3 floors of a house. Reuben is on the bottom floor. Top 2 floors belong to Simeon. Okay, Simeon was doing construction work on the top 3rd floor, and then it ended up caving in, and it fell through the ceiling of the 2nd floor, and it fell so hard it fell even through the 1st ceiling.
Oh, okay.
So, and it damaged some barrels of wine that were there on the 1st floor.
Oh,
So
okay.
Reuben says, "You owe me money. You damaged, right?" Shimon says, "What are you talking about? Your ceiling was about to fall, regardless of me, and I can even prove it." So if he could prove that it was about to fall, should he still be liable to pay?
But if it was about to fall, the guy did the construction. Did he do it because the ceiling was about to fall, or you do it?
No, it's 2 separate owners.
Oh,
So,
okay.
floor 2 and 3 is one owner. Floor 1 is one owner. So he's saying, you damaged my wine. You say whatever you want. You damaged my wine. He says, what do you mean? I can prove that your ceiling was about to fall without me doing anything. So here we have basically someone who does something that ordinarily, usually would carry liability, right? Someone that due to negligence causes a death. We saw in case study A. And I recommend you going in the student books, Mark, to catch up with the case studies because they're going to be crucial for this lesson. We had case study A, which in the books can be found on page 190. We had case study B, where someone damaged a car, and case study C, where someone negligently damages some real estate and wine, right? But in each of these cases, the defendant's claim is very simple. They didn't really cause harm because the harm would have happened with or without them. All they did was preempt the inevitable damage. So the question is, does that remove their liability? Are there differences between these cases? So this is going to be the central question of today's and final lesson. All right, so let's move on to what the Talmud has to say about this. This is going to be a fascinating piece of Talmud. And please don't think of it in practical terms because this is hopefully not very practical. This is just to bring up the case of someone who preempted either damage to a property or damage to a life, etc. So obviously we know, and this is not just in Talmudic law, this is also in civil law. You go to anyone's property, you damage a property, right, Sandy? What happens?
You are liable.
You're liable to pay for any damages, right?
Absolutely.
Well, here's an interesting question. Mark, let's see if you can answer this question. What's if Mike burns my phone? I have a nice, fancy smartphone. Mike burns my phone, right? And he causes me about $600 in damages. Okay? A $600 phone burnt crisp. Then Steve comes along. He takes a torch and he sets it on fire again. Is Steve liable for any damages?
Well, if he did it a second time, well, the first time,
It's two different people.
oh, two different people. Well, I guess the first person would be liable for,
Right. The
the
question is
damage.
Steve, the second guy who burned.
Second guy wouldn't be because the phone's already damaged.
Okay, very good. So basically, what you're saying, Mark, and this is what exists in Talmudic law as well as in civil law, that because Steve didn't increase or didn't make my loss any greater, he's not going to be liable to pay. When you break a broken phone, you didn't make him lose any more money. So what are you going to pay for? Right? That's obvious.
Right.
So this following Talmudic passage is going to try to test the limits of this principle, that when you break a broken thing, how far can you go? So let's look at text 1 on page 194. A fascinating text. Fascinating text. Okay, so text 1. Mark, if you don't mind reading text 1 on page 194.
Rabbi said if someone throws another vessel from a rooftop and a second person comes along and shatters it with a stick before it hits the ground, the second person is exempt. For we say the second one broke a broken vessel.
So listen to the other cases. I drop a phone off of a rooftop, okay? Mid-ear, let's say he throws it off the 20th floor. I'm on the 3rd floor with a bat in my hand. I stick out my bat as it's falling down, and the second the iPhone hits the bat, it crumbles into 1,000 shattered pieces, right? What does Rabbah say? The person that stuck out his bat is exempt from any damages. Why? Look at the last line. The second one broke a broken vessel.
Yeah, well, technically the vessel wasn't broken until it hit
Correct,
the ground.
correct. Scientifically, it was not broken. But he says it's a broken vessel. Before we get into that, let's
Well,
read
yeah, if it hits the ground,
text 2.
yeah.
It's going to give us some more insight. So, Sandy, if you don't mind reading text 2 on page 195.
If a person throws a rock or an arrow toward a vessel and another person comes along and shatters the vessel before the projectile strikes it, certainly the one that shattered the vessel and not the one who threw the rock is liable. In this instance, we do not apply the rationale of the second one broke a broken vessel. Simple logic calls for us to distinguish between throwing a rock toward the vessel and throwing the vessel itself.
Right. So here, Tosafot, which is one of the main commentaries on the Talmud, says, no, depends. If someone threw a rock and then before the rock hit the vessel, you went and damaged the vessel, let's use a phone, which I think a phone is better. Let's say you're holding a phone, okay? I think we can relate a lot more to phones than vessels. Phones are today's 2021's vessels. So you're holding a phone or a phone is sitting on a table and someone throws a rock straight at that phone. Before the rock hits the phone, someone takes a hammer and smashes the phone, right? Tosafot says, of course, the person who smashes it, is liable. Why is it different than the first case? Why don't we use the logic that the person already broke a broken phone? It was about to be broken by this rock.
Anyway.
Yeah, but the point is that it wasn't broken. I mean, if
But
you have a
neither was
rock,
it broken in the first case.
if you have a rock coming at it and the other person with the hammer or whatever device is faster and breaks the phone first, then the person who threw the rock shouldn't be liable because the thing was broken already. I mean, you're assuming that the rock was meant to break the phone. But if the other guy came in first and broke it, then he should be liable.
But again, Mark, both of these cases have an extreme, very, very identical, seemingly identical,
Yeah.
that the second person broke a phone that wasn't yet broken. It wasn't physically broken.
Right.
But in the first case, Rabba says it's a broken vessel. The second case, Tosha says, of course, it's simple logic, that you must, differentiate between throwing a rock and throwing the actual phone itself. So why is it different? So let's kind of get into the rationale behind the second one, broke a broken vessel, okay? So in the first case, Rabba's case, the thrower of the phone didn't yet cause actual damage to the phone, right? He didn't damage it yet. He threw it off the rooftop, but it's not physically broken yet, correct? So one might suggest the one who factually broke it should pay for it. The person who stuck out the bat should pay for it.
Yeah.
What does Rabbah say? No, not at all. He says the initial act prevails.
Yeah.
If nobody else came that morning for batting practice out the window, right? The toss itself would have caused that damage 1,000%. No phone survives a fall of 20 floors. It was 1,000% broken already. The second it left his fingers from the 20th floor, it's a broken phone. So when you stick out that bat, okay, very nice, but it's not a real phone at that point. It's a broken phone. It's inevitable. It's going to break, right? So this is why the thrower is liable for the damages. But the batter, person who sticks out a bat out the window, he broke a broken phone. So
Yeah, but
he's
you
not
see,
liable.
I take issue with that,
Why?
because technically the phone was not broken when the guy was gonna hit it with the bat. Of course, if things take its course and it hits the ground, yeah, it's gonna be broken and shattered or whatever. But it was still working. How do you know that when
So it's
it
a very
gets
good
down
question.
there,
What's
it wasn't a
considered
pan
broken?
in there to absorb the fall?
So it's a very good question. You're saying it's not physically broken yet. So I'm going to prove to you or explain what the Talmud's logic is. What does it mean it's broken? So we'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
But the Talmud or Rabbah compares this case of throwing out a phone exactly to the case I mentioned earlier, that you burn a burnt phone. It's the same thing. You burn a burnt phone, it's burnt already. You're not creating any more damage to the phone.
Yeah, that I agree with.
So now, why does Tosafot in the second case when throwing a rock, why does he say it's different? So we have two general answers by the commentaries why when you throw a rock at the phone, it's different when you throw the phone itself. So let's look at text 3. I'm going to read it quickly. Text 3 on page 196. You guys see it? When one throws a vessel from a rooftop and there are no cushions on the ground, the vessel is certain to break, albeit after a small delay. It is impossible for pottery or wooden vessel not to shatter when it is thrown to the ground with force. By the way, the same logic is to glass, obviously. However, when throwing an arrow or rock at a vessel, the intended vessel is not certain to shatter. Perhaps the thrower did not put enough strength into the throw to shatter it. It is also possible that the arrow or rock will miss the intended target altogether. Therefore, the person who shatters the vessel cannot be excused from liability by saying I broke a broken vessel. What's he saying over here?
Well, that's what I was saying before.
Yeah, but here's the
If-
differentiation. Very key, important detail. That when you throw a phone from a rooftop, it is 1,000% going to break, right?
Yeah,
Only such a case when it is 100% going to break that you can say with certainty. So then the second person who breaks it didn't really break anything. He broke something that's broken already because it's for sure definitively going to break. But a rock, when you throw a rock at the phone, is it 100% going to hit the phone?
No.
Not necessarily. Maybe a high chance, depending on, if the guy has really good aim, if he's a good pitcher, maybe, he has good aim. So chances are that it'll hit the target. But can you say definitively, when a rock is headed towards a phone, can you say definitively that it's going to break? No. You can assume it's going to break, but you can't say definitively. So therefore, because it's not definitive that it's going to break, you can't say for certain it's going to break. So therefore, when you hit that phone before the rock hits it, you didn't break something that's broken already. It's not broken yet.
Yeah.
So that's one way of understanding the difference between throwing a rock at the phone or throwing the phone out the window of a 20th floor. The second explanation, which is in text 4, I think is the more important explanation here. And it's going to really lead us to a lot of different observations here. So let's read text 4. It's on page 197. If between the first person's act and the breaking of the object does not provide utility, then we already regard it as broken from the time of the initial act. When, however, it still provides utility before it is actually broken, we cannot say that it is already broken from the time the first person acted. If it still has utility, it is still legally regarded as a vessel, and it is impossible to call it broken. Fascinating. This is one of the more recent, this is written by a rabbi. A commentary lived about 75 years, about 75 years ago, maybe 100 years ago. This rabbi, Rabbi Gustman, he says that once someone throws a vessel off of a roof, it does not have any utility. What does it mean it doesn't have any utility? Right? It means that it cannot be used any longer to store anything or to use it for something. You cannot use the phone anymore. It's done. It's nothing to talk about. The second it leaves your finger, your hand from that 20th floor, that phone is useless. You cannot use it anymore. The owner does not have benefit from it. There's no utility to it, right? And this is very important because when people pay damages, they pay for the diminishing value of something that they broke. Now, in this case, the value was entirely wiped out once it was thrown from the roof because it's done. It's considered broken. The person cannot use it anymore. When you throw my iPhone off the roof, I, the owner, have no more utility from this phone. So my value of that phone is completely wiped out. So you must pay me that damage, right? Mm-hmm. So this is one part of the puzzle that it must break. It must definitively be on track to break, because otherwise you can't say that the second that it leaves his hand, it's broken, right? The second piece of it is that so again, it must break, and it also must cease to offer any benefit to its owner. So the combination of these two factors makes the thrower liable and the batter not liable. Why? Because the batter broke something that was already shattered in the sense that it was already worth nothing. It's not worth anything. You're following, Mark?
Yep.
Yeah.
However, when a person throws a rock towards a phone, even if we know for sure, by the way, even if we know for sure that it will break, the fact remains that the phone still continues to offer the same amount of benefit to its phone owner. I can still use the phone. Imagine I'm holding the phone to my ear. I'm making a call. The fact that someone threw a rock at this phone, it doesn't change the fact that the phone still works. It still operates. It still I'm still deriving benefit from the phone. So up until that point that you have no benefit, the owner has no benefit, and it's definitively going to break, then it's not considered broken. Only once you have both of those factors definitively breaking and no benefit, that's when you can consider it broken. So the second you let go of it from the 20th floor, there's no benefit to its owner because the owner can't use it anymore, and it's definitively going to break. So there you go. It's valueless for the owner. So it's considered broken. The second the batter hits it, it's a broken vessel. Whereas a rock heading towards a phone, the owner can still use it. Or let's say it's a basket, right? Someone's throwing a rock at a basket. The basket can still hold apples until the rock hits it. Okay, we know that it's going to break eventually. But for those few seconds, that basket still is giving benefit to its owner. Mm-hmm. So until you have those two factors, it is not considered a broken vessel, right? Now, with this in mind, let's return now to two of our case studies, okay? Let's go to case study B. Case study B, Mark, I'm I'm not sure if you read it or not. Case study B is where someone saw two perpetrators stealing from his store, and they were running away in a vehicle, and this guy damaged the vehicle so they can't run away. Turns out that the vehicle was a stolen vehicle, and now Reuben is telling the car owner, yes, you're right, I damaged your stolen car, but really it was a stolen car either way, right? So the fact that I damaged it, it was the same amount of money you would have lost. You would have lost it because it was stolen. The fact that I damaged it is the same amount of money. So I really didn't damage any monetary value of your car. Nothing that I did caused you to lose any more money. So that's his logic. So based on what we said, should Reuven be liable to pay for the damage he caused to the vehicle, right?
No.
So the Israeli court of law, the Israeli Bet Din, said that while an initial assessment might have led it to say that this was a case of damaging a broken vessel, in the end it wasn't so. Why? Because the car owner had theft insurance. And when you have theft insurance, if the car would have been stolen, he would have received the full value of the car from the insurance company, right? But he didn't have any insurance covering, random, damage to the vehicle. So therefore, had Reuven not done anything, the car owner wouldn't have lost anything because he would have filed a claim with the insurance company that his car was stolen. He would have gotten back the full value of the car. So the fact that he damaged it now made it worse for him. Now he has no insurance for the damages.
He had no insurance for the damage, you said?
No insurance for the damage in this specific case, but he had insurance for theft.
Oh,
That
So he
makes a
says,
difference.
if you wouldn't have touched this car, I would have gotten the full value. The fact that you damaged it, now you owe me money. Now, what if the owner didn't have theft insurance? So it would seem, at least upon analysis, that the broken vessel exemption would still not be relevant because we cannot say with certainty that this car would have been lost from its owner forever.
Mhm.
What's the biggest proof? This guy found his vehicle with two thieves right there. So and it's possible that the police would have found it. You can't say that it was broken, that it'll be lost forever. So it's not considered a broken vessel. So because it's not considered a broken vessel, Reuven is liable to pay for any damage he caused to the vehicle.
the car is not considered a broken vessel?
It's not considered like a broken car,
Oh, okay.
because you cannot say with certainty that he would have lost his car forever, even without insurance.
Right.
It's possible someone would have found it. It's not a broken car, a lost car forever, right?
Mhm.
So that's case study B. Case study C, this is about the roof. We have 3 floors. So the question is, if Shimon's claim can be substantiated, if he can prove that Reuven's ceiling was about to fall either way, is he still responsible to compensate Reuven for his ceiling, and why? Based on what we learned, what would you say?
Well, this has nothing to do with broken vessels or anything because the wine was sitting there was fine. It was just the ceilings that were not fine. So I wouldn't think that
So I'll tell you,
person would be liable for it, the owner of the building or the owner of the upper floors.
right. So the key here
Well,
is the
I was
condition of Reuven's ceiling, right? Was it definitely going to break under its own weight? And until it broke, was he able to gain any utility, any benefit from having the ceiling? That's the key question. Because if he's able to get benefit from having the ceiling, then at the end of the day, it's not considered a broken ceiling. So long that the owner has benefit from his ceiling, it's not considered broken. I have benefit. You taking away that benefit from me, you're the one that's liable, not me. That's what
Who
Reuben
took away the benefit from whom?
Shimon, his construction fell through all the ceiling.
Oh, okay.
A broken ceiling. So he's saying, oh, that your ceiling would have broke anyway.
Oh,
Reuben's saying back, what do you mean? At the end of the day, I would have had benefit from the time that it would have been standing. Who said it would have, fallen today? So it's not considered a broken ceiling. I'm still enjoying my ceiling as long as it can last. Now, that's what Reuven says. The issue is that the experts said that there's a danger of imminent collapse. That's what happens. They came, they assessed the situation, and they said that it was in immediate danger of buckling. So the notion that the ceiling was surely going to break, it gives us at least one part of the criteria that it's definitively going to break, right? So at least we know that. It's for sure going to break.
Right.
But the utility factor is a little more complicated, right? Because even though the ceiling was for sure going to break, the fact remains that until it did, it sheltered Reuben and it gave him benefit, right? And by the way, in fact, the experts who looked at it said that, even though it could have buckled right away, it also could have lasted, another few months. So it's complicated. Does he have benefit or not? So nevertheless, even though we can claim he has benefit, the Rivash, which is a great commentary on the Talmud, he disregarded this being a true utility. He says, if the ceiling could cave immediately, imagine, again, God forbid, not us. Imagine you're sitting in a room, okay? And the ceiling can technically cave at any given moment. So Reuven, which was the case, Reuven had an obligation to fix it right away for the safety of the residents, right? So the ceiling may have been providing, utility benefit in actual fact, but it was a very dangerous and hazardous utility, and therefore was prohibited by law. So therefore, Shimon really wouldn't have to pay anything. He doesn't have to pay for anything.
Right.
Makes no difference. You guys following?
Yes.
So Shimon doesn't have to pay. Why? Because he says your ceiling was about to break. Oh, you're going to tell me it wasn't exactly going to break right now? The fact that it could break right now at any given moment, that itself is enough to tell me that you're not actually having a real benefit from it. And it's prohibited. Now, what about the wine? At the end of the day, he damaged wine, right? So the ceiling we ruled he doesn't have to pay for. What about the wine? He damaged 3 barrels of wine.
I think he should be reimbursed for that at least.
Right. So the wine, the Rivash actually rules that, like you said, Sandy, he must be reimbursed for the 3 barrels of wine. Why? He says, yeah, you're right. The ceiling was in danger of buckling and collapsing and needed to be replaced immediately. But you can't say with certainty that the barrels would have been damaged. Can you say for sure? Maybe he would have moved it to a part of the room that the ceiling wouldn't have fallen on.
Okay.
So the wine didn't have the factor of being broken for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So it's because you don't have the factor of a broken vessel. Therefore, when that ceiling came down, the ceiling he's not liable for, but for the wine he's liable for. Right?
So then Reuben wouldn't get reimbursed for the wine?
He gets reimbursed.
He gets reimbursed. Okay, that's what I thought.
Why? Because the ceiling doesn't have the factor. The ceiling has the factor of a definitive breaking and the factor of no utility. Whereas the wine doesn't have the factor of definitive breaking. Who said maybe he would have moved it to a different room? Who said it would have for sure broken? So because
did Reuben know that the ceiling was going to collapse? Because I kind of missed this story.
Well, it doesn't really make a difference whether he knew or not. Regardless, if your ceiling is about to break, it's no one else's problem that it broke from something else, because it could have broken at any given moment.
Okay.
So there's no real utility. There's no real benefit because any second, even before, this thing fell on his ceiling, it could have broken.
Well,
So just to summarize here.
the only reason I asked is because if he knew about it, if the guy on top told him about it and he didn't move the wine out of there,
Oh, of course. Yeah, yeah.
And
then for sure he wouldn't be liable, wouldn't he?
then he,
Yeah. If he
couldn't
was
be
told you
liable.
got to move it, yeah, that's not even the question. Yeah, of course. This is that he didn't know.
Okay. Okay.
And he said, I'll prove it. I'll bring experts. I'll prove it. Now,
yeah.
so if you look at page 201, figure 6.1, right? So where someone, there's preemptive damage, preemptive cause. What's the rulings? If you look at case study B, so it depends. If the vehicle had theft insurance, then he's liable. And if he didn't have theft insurance, he's still liable. In the case study C, he says for the ceiling, right? If it was in danger of immediate collapse, then he is not liable to pay for the ceiling. If it wasn't going to collapse for at least another year, it was clear, then he's only liable to pay for the value of a year, for as long as the benefit would have lasted. And the wine, he's always going to be liable for because there's no certainty that would have broken.
Mm.
Okay, now let's move on to our first case study, which Mark, I know you missed, but the case is that there was a kid who was playing on a bridge, and he was playing on a bridge. Oh, you saw that?
Yeah, the kid was playing. They've been climbing up the vertical girders for a long time to get to the horizontal ones.
So the question is, should the electric company be liable? Or can we apply the rule of Rabbah that it was a broken vessel, meaning he was going to die either way, to this, to this electric company and exonerate them from any liability? Now, we know that Rabbah's ruling applies to instances of property damage, like we said, right? He said you can break something that's broken already, right? But the question is, does his ruling apply to an instance of life and death? That's the real question. So that's the question of the bridge. So in order to answer the question, we have to study one more Talmudic passage before we get a definitive answer here. So let's look at text 7a on page 204. So Mark, you want to read?
Yeah. Rabbah said, if a person throws an infant from a rooftop and another person comes along and kills the infant with a sword before it hits the ground, this issue is debated by Rabbi Yehuda ben Betira and the sages.
Okay, so this is the same exact case of the phone that was dropped from the 20th floor, except that here we're dealing with a human life. Human life. That someone threw a child from a rooftop, God forbid, okay? Then another person comes along and sticks out a sword, and the child dies on the way down, on its fall, right? So the child dies before it even hits the ground. So Rabbah, which by a phone, he says unequivocally that, the person who threw the phone is not liable. Sorry, the person who threw the phone is liable, and the person who actually broke the phone is not liable. Here he says, over here it's life and death. That is a special argument between Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera and the sages. Okay? Now, to be sure, the earlier sages, they didn't really debate this very case. Rabbah just reasoned that an earlier dispute on another related matter indicated that the sages would debate this hypothetical case as well. Now, where did he derive this from? That there's a conflict, there's an argument, debate between Rabbi Yehuda and the sages. Let's look at text 7b, page 204. Sandy, if you don't mind reading.
It was taught, if 10 people strike a victim with 10 clubs, whether they do it simultaneously or consecutively, they are all exempt.
Yeah. Interesting case. Now, again, let's try to, remove our emotions from this. So in one variation of this terrible case, what happens is 10 people attack a victim simultaneously. Okay. Now each one delivered a blow so strong that it was enough to kill the victim just from that blow. Okay. Now in the second variation of the case, they don't all do it at once. Rather, they each attack the victim consecutively. And again, each blow was enough to kill the victim. But here's the thing. The victim only dies after the final blow. So what do the sages say? It says that all of these people are exempt. What do you mean they're exempt? Exempt from what? They're exempt from, get ready, from the death penalty. Because when the Sanhedrin, which was the Jewish court, was in operation, a murderer could be executed if there was valid witnesses and a host of other, conditions were met. But the sages say that in this case, none of these men could be put to death. Why? So they break it down. In the first scenario, where 10 people attack the victim at the same time, none of them could be executed because it's impossible to pin that fatal blow on any one person. So therefore, even if all the other requirements are met for the death penalty, the attackers are not subject to the death penalty. And everyone agrees with this, because how are you going to say that this guy is the one that really killed the guy? You can't really say that. You can't say definitively that any one of these attackers was the one that killed the victim. They did it all at the same time.
I have one question.
Yeah.
The last person you're going to get the death penalty, but what about the other 9 people? Don't they get punished somehow?
Wait. Sorry. The first case where I said they all attacked the victim at the same time, no one gets a death penalty. The second case,
Oh, okay.
where each one dealt a fatal blow, but the guy only died. The victim only died after the 10th blow. So over there, the sages rule again that none of them receive a death penalty. Why? It says the final 9 attackers are not really liable because they hit someone. Get ready. They hit someone who was already struck with a deadly blow.
Oh.
Again, attackers 2 through 10 attacked someone that was already attacked a deadly blow. And according to the sages, that takes the death penalty off the table. Why?
Well, my question is, what about everybody else? I mean, one person gets the death penalty, but doesn't everybody else get some kind of criminal charges against them?
No one gets a death penalty. No one does.
But what about like spending time in jail for?
Wait. Okay, we'll get there. Let's talk about the death penalty for a second.
All right.
So, according to the sages, because attackers through to 10 attacked someone who was already dealt a deadly blow, so the death penalty is off the table, because in a sense they struck someone who was already murdered.
Okay.
Now the first attacker is not liable either, according to the sages, because in the end, we can't tell whether the victim died from his blow. How are you going to know? Not every time someone dealt a deadly blow do they die. It's happened before that someone is shot, right? Someone is shot, or someone is punched to the ground and has internal bleeding. Not every time that it's a deadly blow does the guy actually die. So you can't pin it to the first guy either, according to the sages. So you can't put a murderer to death for giving a deadly blow. You have to wait for it to take effect and to actually kill the victim. Like I said, because sometimes there are cases where even what experts would call a deadly blow, it doesn't lead to the death of the victim. So therefore, we must wait and watch the process unfold, and which we can't do in this case. So we have no choice but to exonerate the first attacker as well. Pretty fascinating. Now, here is where Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera strongly disagrees. Yeah. This is where he says text 7c. He says, page 205, Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera said, when done consecutively, the last person is liable Why? For expediting the victim's death. He says, it's true that 9 attackers hit someone who was about to die. But nevertheless, he thinks that the last one to strike deserves the death penalty. Again, this is assuming that all the other conditions are met that are required for a death penalty. Why, he says? Because this last attacker deserves to be executed because he expedited the victim's death. And this, he says, arguing with the sages, is enough to warrant the death penalty. Now, of course, all of the 10 attackers expedited his death, right? So why is he pinning it on the last one? He says, I'm only holding the last one liable because to be liable for the death penalty, you have to be able to show and see how the action led to the death without any intervention in between. The last one, he gave him a deadly blow and then he died. So you can prove directly that that blow was a deadly blow, a real deadly blow.
Okay.
So basically, we have a dispute as to whether one is liable to receive the death penalty for expediting an inevitable death. Again, someone's going to die, and there's a dispute whether expediting that death is enough to exonerate them or not from the death penalty. The sages say no, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera says yes. Now, Rabbah thinks that this same dispute will carry over to his case of the child that was thrown from the roof. The sages would say that because the child was going to die either way, so the one who swung his sword at the infant is not executed. And the one who threw the child is not liable either because his action wasn't the one that led directly to the murder. It wasn't direct. And Rabbi Yehuda would say, yes, the first one is not liable, but he argues that the second man is liable to receive the death penalty because he expedited the death of his child. The fact remains that his action led to the direct result of a death. So we already noticed how the two rooftop cases are different, right? Rabbah was very confident about what the law was for the phone that was thrown from the roof, right? The batter is not liable to pay.
Yeah.
And he left the case of the child being thrown from the roof as a debate between the sages of Rabbi Yehuda and the sages. Now, just that you know, when it says exempt, right? So he said it's exempt from death penalty. So, and I think, Mark, you mentioned, is he exempt totally? Does he have to pay for anything, for damages? So the answer to that is that he is liable to pay to a certain degree, not pay money, but there's an interesting law in Jewish law, which is that when someone unintentionally, I'll actually read it together in text 8a, page 205. Whether a person kills an adult or a one-day-old infant or a male or female, the killer should be executed if he killed intentionally and exiled. I'll tell you in a second what that is. Exiled if he killed unintentionally. If, however, one kills a person who's about to die because of wounds inflicted by other perpetrators, for example, if the victim is on the verge of death because of repeated blows, the killer should not be executed by the court. And like we continue text AB, the implication is that the court cannot execute this person, but he is liable under the laws of heaven. Now, what does it mean? Is that he is really guilty of murder, but he's not given the death penalty either. It does happen sometimes. I don't think it's really possible to happen in a jury in a civil case. I know it's quite relevant to today's news, but very rarely will you have or I don't think it's possible in civil law that someone is guilty of murder, but he's not really punished like that. In Judaism, because he's guilty of murder doesn't mean that he's executed, doesn't mean he's given the death penalty. So what usually ends up happening is that he is forced to go into exile. What was exile? Exile was that when God gave the land of Israel to the Jews after the giving of the Torah, he designated 6 cities, 6 towns in Israel as refuge towns. That if anyone by mistake, murders another human being, So he can run to this refuge town, and if he makes it in time before he's killed, he can run to this refuge town, and you're not allowed to be killed. It's almost like, it reminds me almost of like the game where you can't be caught if you're on base, right? Like you play tag, kids play tag. If you're on base, you can't be touched, can't be caught. So as soon as this person, this unintentional murderer, runs to this refuge town, he's good to go, and he has to stay there for life until the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, dies. As soon as the Kohen Gadol passes away, he's allowed to leave there, and then it's over. But if he leaves the refuge town, then anyone from the family of the victim is allowed to kill him, allowed to avenge the blood.
Oh.
Literally. So it's an interesting scenario over here. Where over here, he's really guilty of murder, okay? But you're not actually given the death penalty. So what we see over here is that the bottom line is that we walk away with a very narrow dispute about whether the person standing on the ground who struck the baby is executed, and all agree, whether he's actually executed or not, everyone agrees that he's guilty of a murderous act. That's not even the question. He's for sure guilty of murder. The question is, does he get the death penalty or not? Now, which kind of raises the question, why is this different from someone who smashes a falling phone? As we said before, he is said to be completely exempt on all levels. When someone throws a phone and then someone takes a bat and swings at the phone and breaks the phone, that person is completely exempt. Mm-hmm. What's the difference? Why by a human life is he not exempt? He's guilty of a murderous act, but over here he isn't. But by the phone he isn't. What's the difference?
Human life.
Human life. So, like you said, Mark, obviously a clear line is drawn between monetary damage and the issue of life and death, right? And I'll just give you the pointer here before we conclude, is that we said before that the broken vessel principle is kind of tied to two conditions, right? We said that when someone throws a phone, someone throws a vessel from a rooftop, it has to be that both of these conditions are met. It has to be that it'll for sure break, and that what? As no utility, stop giving any value or utility to the owner, right? So with a human life, when it comes to a phone, you can very easily determine whether the owner has value from it or not, right? But the utility test doesn't really make sense when you're dealing with a human life, right? The value of a life, as you see in text 9 on page 207, the laws of murder have nothing to do with utility. All what matters is the taking of a life. Because the value of a life doesn't lie in its utility. Our lives aren't valuable only because of the things we can accomplish. The value of life on the truest level lies in the very fact that everyone over here listening and watching, and every single Jew and human being has a soul, has a divine soul that's present in the human body, regardless of the degree of visible function that it actually exhibits. And each soul in a body provides the world with a unique burst of divine energy, like a candle in a dark room. Like I was telling you, Sandy, on Friday evening when it was your birthday, that because you're given a soul, you have something unique to contribute to this world. So when an infant is thrown, God forbid, from a rooftop, it's certain to die in a matter of seconds. But these last few seconds are seconds of life. They mean something. So the murderer who preempts and even though it's only by a few seconds that he sticks out the sword and kills the infant a few seconds earlier, is still a few seconds earlier of life, of true life. How can you measure every second of life? Right? So now how will this apply to our case of the boy who fell from the bridge? I think it's pretty clear. Right? So
How did
Like
the
it,
boy
yeah.
fall from the bridge? He just fell?
So yeah, he was playing around. He fell from the bridge, and then he grabbed onto the electric wires.
Oh, okay.
So um, without getting into all the laws pertaining to exile, the one could definitely make the argument, make the case that the directors or the employees of the electric company who left the wires exposed, they committed an act of negligence that would call for a punishment of at least exile. It was unintentional, it was negligence, but at the very least, they have to go into exile. And because we saw that both the sages and Rabbi Yehuda agree that preemptive murder is murder, whether they get the death penalty or not, it's still murder. The entire debate was only about the death penalty. So you can even make a further argument, a second argument that what? You can make a second argument that that the negligent preemptor is liable for exile.
Yeah.
Now, how would this actually play out in real life? There's no cities of refuge today. So what does it mean that they have to go to exile? Right?
When you say exile, you mean they actually have to get thrown out of the country?
Oh, so in times of the Beit HaMikdash, or the Holy Temple, what it meant was they went to these refuge towns.
Oh, okay.
But today, what does
Yeah.
exile mean? And by the way, just on a side note, if these children, I know you asked this question, Mark, a minute ago, how did he fall? What was he doing there? If they actually trespassed, they weren't allowed to be there, then they would not even be liable for this, and they would not be liable to pay with exile, whatever exile is. I'll tell you in a second.
Mhm.
So how is exile relevant today? So it means today that he or she, and this is what most commentators believe, it means that he or she or the company would need to pursue a very specific and a very rigorous path of repentance. If our analysis is correct, then we concluded that there is liability for negligence in this case.
Mhm.
True, not liability that obligates, compensation in such a way that they have to pay with their life. But at least with exile. What is exile? Repentance. Now, what does repentance mean? Between me and you, what does it mean that they have to have a specific, rigorous path of repentance? So when someone is responsible for an unintentional death, one of the great sages, Rabbi Akiva Eger, he ruled that a part of his atonement would be to spend money on other children to raise them. And I think this may have relevance in this case, where the company should be liable and should be forced to open a scholarship fund or open a fund to pay for other children to have a better life. So that's their way of atonement today. And by the way, this does happen once in a while where, companies who do something wrong, they feel bad. And even though they're not actually, liable in court, they'll open scholarship funds for honoring this child, this teenager, or whoever it was. So this is really, according to Talmud, to conclude with this case study, what they would be liable to do is exile. Exile today is repentance. Repentance today is spending money on other children to raise them. You can do it with an orphanage, a scholarship fund, so et cetera, et cetera. With that, we conclude the case, the dilemma. And I hope you enjoyed the ride of going back and forth in Talmud. This gives you just a glimpse into what Talmud really is and how it actually plays out in a yeshiva setting. This is what we did for many, many years. We're going to be having a few upcoming fascinating and really enjoyable courses. We're going to do that, I believe, in June. I think we're going to be I think in June we're going to begin that. So stay tuned for upcoming course. If there's any specific topic that you would like to be covered, whether it's Kabbalah, whether it's Journey of the Soul, whether it is something along the lines of Talmud or different types of things, of law, make sure you email me, text me, tell me. Always happy to accommodate the wider community to make sure that everyone is learning and studying Torah that is of interest and relevance. So looking forward to seeing you all next Thursday. Again, this is the last class for this course, so no class next Tuesday. Next Thursday is Lag BaOmer. We're going to have our communal barbecue in our backyard. We're going to have Thursday, 5 p.m., April 29th. 5 p.m., we're going to have a moon balance for the children. We're going to be having cornhole games. You know what cornhole games are. We're going to be having that for the adults as well. We're going to be having some fun activities. And of course, meat, burgers, hot dogs, chicken, everything you can think of. And the alcoholic beverages, of course. Everything on the house. Make sure you let us know you'll be joining. We at 5 p.m., hoping that the weather holds up. As well as on May 16th, in 3 weeks from now, just about, we will be having 3 to 4 weeks. We'll be having Shavuot. We'll be having cheesecake and commandments. We'll be reading the 10 Commandments from the Torah and having a cheesecake, a dairy party, as well as it will be a party for Dusia, which we have not celebrated yet with the community, celebrating her birth. So that's going to be on May 16th. Stay tuned for more details. But in the meantime, thank you all. Thank you to all, to Mark, Fran, Sandy, to Joe, Louise, and Jack and Barbara, whoever helped bring this course to Chabad of Shelton. And looking forward to seeing you all very, 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 very soon. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Thank you.
Bye.